General business order of the day for bills number 2, Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill, second reading speech.
I call the member for Kira.
I move that this bill be now read a second time.
Yep.
Straight in? Yep. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. All of us come into this place to make a contribution to the lives of people that we're fortunate to represent. For some of us in this house, it's because we've grown up in the communities that we love and the communities that we live in and the communities that we call home. For some people, particularly in the other house, it's about making reform to key policy areas, to legislation and to improve the lives of working men and women right across New South Wales. All of us as parliamentarians, Mr. Acting Speaker, should continue to have a drive to improve the state of New South Wales. I think if you lose that passion, if you lose that drive, then you should look for something else to occupy your time. With this in mind, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate and thank my colleague, the Honourable Mark Buttigieg from the other place, for putting forward one of the most important pieces of legislation coming out of a tragedy that this Parliament perhaps will see in recent times. Mark Buttigieg is someone who wants to make a difference. And today it's a great honour to read his bill, a bill that is going to do just that if this place, the oldest parliament in the land, passes an important piece of legislation, a piece of legislation off the back of a tragedy that we hopefully can ensure never happens again. It has been 4 long years since a cross-connection of gas delivery outlets at Bankstown and Lidcombe Hospital led to the devastating death of a baby boy, John Gannam, and a baby girl, Amelia Khan, was tragically left with catastrophic brain damage. In these 4 years, we have only seen and heard complete and utter silence and a lack of action from the government on this issue. Can I start by saying to the families of Amelia and baby John, our hearts are with you, our thoughts are with you. And I hope today this Parliament is with you as we do what we are expected to do, what you would expect of us, what I'm sure the community you're from expects of us, and that is to improve legislation to ensure a tragedy like this never happens again. It's what all of us would want if it was our children, and we would expect a fighter in this place to bring it to this house to make a change. And in this place, that fighter has been the Honourable Mark Buttigieg. I'm disappointed that after 4 years, we have now got a situation where we have a comprehensive bill from the opposition, yet we have a 2-page regulation from the government. That's not good enough. That's pettiness. This place is better than that. We're better than that. The community expects us to be better than that. We don't always get it right over here. You've got to start realising you don't always get it right over there. If we have this attitude too many times, we're going to see important pieces of legislation and reform not delivered in this place. And I ask to the government, if this was your child, if this was one of your family members, would we have seen a 4-year delay? I think not. The government's criticism about the bill's deficiencies demonstrate that the government has had no consultation with industry experts, and it shows the government does not possess a great deal of knowledge of this, which can be expected as the government has ignored this issue over a number of years. If the government had any real concerns over the bill that the Honourable Mark Buttigieg has brought forward, there's a simple thing for them to do. They'd put the safety of New South Wales first, and they'd move sensible amendments. My colleague, the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, has been open to that from day one. He has said repeatedly to me, to his colleagues and to the family, I want to get the best piece of legislation passed. That's my job. I think if a few more of us had that attitude, we would see an improvement to the legislative schedule and the legislation that's passed this place. The government's regulation is 2 pages and prescribes only types of medical gases where there needs to eventually be some form of a licensing for people that deal with them. In November. This is a lightweight, light touch measure, as there's nothing in the regulation which ensures individuals have to have a comprehensive trade, training and education, something that the Honourable Mark Buttigie's bill addresses. There is nothing in the regulation or the mechanism it creates that will prevent the tragedies that happened at this hospital. But Labor's bill will protect the residents of New South Wales going forward with its robust requirements. Mr Acting Speaker, the government has not regulated to have a comprehensive licensing regime, whereas Labor has set out legislative requirements which ensures that only the highly skilled, trained and educated individuals, tradespeople, are carrying out work which has life and death consequences. This bill amends the Home Building Act 1989 to provide for the licensing of mechanical services, including medical gas systems works, and the new licence would be administered by Fair Trading. Unlike New South Wales, Mr Acting Speaker, Queensland and Victoria have building authorities. The Queensland Building and Construction Commission and the Victoria Building Authority are able to administer important licences like mechanical services and medical gas. As our state urgently requires medical services and medical gas licensing, this bill, the Honourable Mark Buttigie's bill, a bill coming out of a tragedy, a bill that his builds on this, seeks to operate within the existing legislative framework in New South Wales. It functions in the equivalent way to other licences, which operate and administered through the Home Building Act. This bill does incorporate the key concepts and requirements from Queensland and Victorian legislation. A smart move, a smart practice. It's not about reinventing the wheel. This is already happening in this country. These are widely known and they are accepted by industry professionals to be a world-class standard for mechanical services and medical gas. This bill amends the Home Building Act 1989 to also include a new category of specialist work called mechanical services work that includes medical gas. The new definition of mechanical services work to be included has been developed to align with industry expectations and follows the current successful regulatory regime definitions in the other jurisdictions. Another important part of this bill is a new section 15A, which prohibits an individual from doing any mechanical services work which include medical gas without a licence. A key component, a key outcome that has come as a result of this tragedy that we are all very, very familiar with. The maximum penalty for failure to comply with this requirement is 1,000 penalty units, which is $110,000 for a corporation and 200 penalty units in any other case, which is $22,000. The section of the bill is consistent with the drafting of the Home Building Act, as the equivalent statutory fine is currently in place for other specialist works that we'd be familiar with, such as electrical work when work is done without a licence. Mr Acting Speaker, Section 33E is something that I believe is a very, very important part of this bill. It's the component that provides the minimum requirements to attain a licence to undertake mechanical services work. This is the gatekeeper, the stopgap, the requirement that I'm sure we all thought was in place that wasn't. The requirements in 33E, subsection 1, are the successful completion of the applicable Certificate 3 in Plumbing, brackets mechanical services, close brackets course, which includes the Medical Gas Competency Unit. People will be competent when using this type of material and equipment, as well as the successful completion of an apprenticeship or 4 years' experience acceptable to the Secretary, but must include, and I stress, must include medical gas experience. Additionally, 33E, same component, but a subsection 2 of the bill, ensures that this new regime does not unfairly omit individuals from an entitlement to be licensed when they've had at least 4 years' experience in mechanical services work. In addition, however, to completing the necessary updated unit of medical gas competency within the preceding 2 years. In addition, the bill provides for the commencement of the proposed Act on the date that is 6 months after the date of consent. Mr. Acting Speaker, we come to this place to make a difference. If you listen to all of the inaugural speeches, I think you would agree that that's a common theme. Today we can make a difference. Today we can right a wrong. Today we can learn that from a tragedy can come some hope. And we can say and look the eyes of family members very clearly and say, your Parliament, your representatives, listened and acted. It's taken too long. It's taken an opposition member to bring it to this place. So I hope there's a couple of learnings out of today. One, that the government needs to move a lot faster in the future. Two, today would be a way for the government to reach out across the table and say, we put the lives of our community above everything else, above petty politics, above the political divide. And we will reach out, we will amend your bill if we feel it can be improved, something that my colleague, the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, has offered in a genuine spirit of improvement and making sure we get the best outcome. Those two things can start today. Our community and the family members are looking very, very closely at today's debate. They're looking if we put petty politics to the side and we put their interests front and centre. If this was my baby, if this was my child, I would be demanding nothing less. Let's show everybody that in some of the darkest times we are experiencing now across our community, that this place can come together and deliver reform, legislative reform, brought to this place by my colleague, the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, with a spirit of passion, determination, and with one only focus in mind: to ensure this tragedy never happens again, and to ensure the families of baby John and Amelia, whose life will never be the same again, at least feel as though they have done their very, very best so that no other family member experiences the tragedy that they do.
Thank the member for Kira. I call the Minister for Better Regulation and Innovation.
Thanks, Mr Assistant Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise on behalf of the Government to speak on the Home Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. This bill is dealing with incredibly tragic circumstances. We all agree in this chamber that we need to do more to lift standards and to licence those installing medical gas. There is no disagreement on this, and we don't need to debate that issue. Mr Assistant Speaker, I know I speak on behalf of everybody in this place when I say that nobody wants to see a tragedy like the ones we saw at Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital repeated. Our thoughts and prayers continue to go to the families affected, and I know Daniel is here in the Parliament today, father of Amelia. As a father of three, I can only imagine the absolute devastation facing those families as a result of this incident. We must ensure as much as possible that this can never happen again. We must take steps, and we will take steps, to provide a strong, robust licensing framework for those installing medical gas in New South Wales. To the families, I say on behalf of the government, I want to give you a commitment that we will be taking action to ensure no other families have to endure what you have. Mr Assistant Speaker, I would also like to thank the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, who's in the lower house chamber today, for the work he's done to bring this bill to the House. I've met him and discussed this bill and there is absolutely no doubt that for Mr Buttigieg, his passion and understanding of this area runs deep. I commend him for the work that he's done in bringing this bill to the House. I have indicated to him that the government is absolutely supportive of the intent of this bill, and we are committed to introducing new legislation and licensing requirements for medical gas installation in New South Wales. I've also told him that we cannot support this bill in its current form. While it's well-intentioned and while it has the foundations of what is needed to license medical gas installation in New South Wales, there are a number of areas that need more work. These areas must be addressed before we pass this bill, so there are not unintended consequences or blind spots in this legislation, because that is something that nobody in this House wants to see. I'll spend time later in my speech outlining some of the areas that we believe need refinement. So after deep consideration and analysis that the government will not be supporting this bill, Mr Assistant Speaker, we are absolutely committed to bringing in a licensing scheme in New South Wales by the 1st of November this year. In fact, we've already started that work. Yesterday, the Governor approved the Gas and Electricity (open bracket) Consumer Safety (close bracket) Amendment (open bracket) Medical Gas Work (close bracket) Regulation 2020. The regulation brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. This is the first step in the government's process for establishing a strong regulatory framework for the licensing of persons who carry out medical gas work. I've also given notice of motion in this place on Tuesday to bring legislation that will deal with this issue. And Mr Assistant Speaker, I've indicated that it is my intention to work closely with Mr Buttigieg if he wishes, so we can develop that legislation. We will obviously draw out those elements that are workable from what he has proposed and build on them to ensure that we have a strong, coherent licensing system. Mr Assistant Speaker, it is also my intention to bring the Gas Legislation Amendment (open bracket) Medical Gas Systems (close bracket) Bill 2020 back to Parliament in the next session in this place. Mr Speaker, I'd now like to turn to the substance of this bill to highlight some of the areas where we believe improvements and the community believe improvements are needed, and the issues the government will seek to address in its own bill. The government opposes the bill because of a number of issues that will make the bill unpractical and unworkable. The biggest concern the government has is that the bill creates a shell for a licensing framework under the Home Building Act 1989, without the detail necessary to ensure a comprehensive and effective regulatory regime. The opposition's bill proposes to amend the Home Building Act 1989 to establish a licensing scheme for persons engaged in the construction, installation, maintenance, repair, alteration, testing or commissioning of medical gas or medical gas systems. The bill appears to mirror the Victorian plumbing legislation without any consideration of how the provisions of that legislation would interact with existing New South Wales laws. The bill seeks to extend its ambit to mechanical heating and cooling systems used in air conditioning, including heating and cooling towers that are used in buildings. Mr Assistant Speaker, this is unnecessary. The Home and Building Act 1989 already substantially covers persons involved in these processes. The definition also extends to all premises where medical procedures are carried out. This could be problematic. For example, the Victorian legislation includes veterinary surgeries, which appears to be beyond the intended scope of the bill. The basis of the licensing framework in the bill is also inadequate. The bill combines work requirements and licensing procedures within the one instrument, and this is inconsistent with building standards and licensing frameworks in this state. For example, licensed gas fitters have oversight under the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act 2017. The licensing and regulation of these persons is contained in the Home Building Act 1989. The benefit of doing this is that the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act already provides the heads of power for the regulator to put in place specific conditions and obligations for workers, as well as strict compliance requirements and strong enforcement powers. In addition, under the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act and regulation, the existing provisions offers benefits of mandatory testing, inspection and compliance following gas fitting work. The way this bill has been drafted means those powers are not available. The bill also lists the education and experience requirements for licence holders. This detail is better placed in regulation and published in the Gazette to allow the government to update requirements quickly as they change from time to time. As this bill is drafted, if the regulator determined it was appropriate to urgently require updated qualifications for licence holders, they would be unable to do this without returning to Parliament and amending the Act. This is an unnecessary, complex and cumbersome process. It is also out of step with the process used for mandating qualifications for other licence frameworks used in New South Wales. This issue is also replicated in Schedule 1 of the bill, which lists the classes of medical gas which will be subject to the new licensing obligations. As drafted, these gases reflect those listed in the relevant Australian standard. The problem with this approach is that if and when the Australian standards change and new gases need to be added or removed over time, we will need to return to Parliament. As with the issue of mandating qualifications, these are requirements that should be mandated by regulation so that changes can be made quickly without the need to return to Parliament. This is precisely why the government on Wednesday moved to gazette the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Amendment Medical Gas Work Regulation 2020, which brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. The bill also requires an experience component of at least 4 years for licensees. Again, any experience component is best left to be determined by the regulator in consultation with the industry that is to be regulated. It should not be placed in the Act. Mr Speaker, under the Building Amendment Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020, Section 15A would make it an offence to do mechanical services work if a person is not qualified. This provision does not commence until 6 months after the assent of the Act. However, Section 33E outlines the proposed qualifications and experience required to become qualified. These requirements do not commence until 2 years after the assent of the Act. Under this bill, qualified gas fitters and plumbers will also need to undertake additional units of competency for medical gas fitting, a Cert 3 in plumbing mechanical services. I'm advised, Mr Assistant Speaker, no such training providers in New South Wales currently offer this course. I understand that in the meantime, during this 18-month gap, it's proposed that the Secretary, under the existing Section 33D of the Home Building Act, the Secretary would determine qualifications and experience for those wanting a mechanical services licence during this period. While this provides time to ensure training is fit for purpose, the industry has uncertainty as to what will be expected of them to continue operating in that period. More importantly, under the existing Section 33D of the Home Building Act, the Secretary would be determining what qualifications and experience are required for those who need a licence. Because there are no equivalent training courses in New South Wales, the Secretary would be determining if applicants hold appropriate skills and competencies without a fit-for-purpose course which could be used as a benchmark. The outcome would be similar to what is currently available now and would not meet the objective of lifting safety and qualifications that the bill is seeking. There is also risk in effectively authorising a lower qualification threshold. This issue needs serious consideration before any new licensing scheme is set up. The bill also creates inadvertently a loophole which could be exploited by those seeking to avoid having to undertake the further qualifications needed which the bill seeks to require of medical gas installers. During the most recent licensing reforms undertaken in New South Wales, we've moved to introduce standard 1, 3 or 5 year licensing periods for all trade licences in New South Wales. These reforms were supported by Labor in the House. Under the opposition bill, if an installer was to apply for a licence in the 18-month grace period, relying on having obtained the qualifications as determined under Section 33D, they could request a 3 or 5 year licence at that time. Once the requirement to attain the new licence qualification comes into force under Section 33E of the bill 2 years after assent, anyone previously granted a licence by the Secretary under Section 33D could continue operating with that licence. This means, Mr Assistant Speaker, they would continue to be licensed under a different scheme with a lower qualification threshold, and there would be no requirement to gain the new qualification under this bill until they renewed their licence some 5 years after the licence was issued. This could mean, this could mean that we have people with no specialist medical gas qualifications working on these medical gas systems in our hospitals for up to 5 years before they are required to gain the new qualification. I'm sure, Mr Assistant Speaker, that this is not the intention of the honourable member. Again, this is a significant issue that the government will address in its legislation. Mr Assistant Speaker, the government is committed to legislating to address this issue. But to address the issue effectively, which means establishing an appropriate and robust licensing scheme. As I said earlier, the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Amendment Medical Gas Work Regulation 2020 was approved by the Governor yesterday. The regulation brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. This is the first step in the government's process for establishing a strong regulatory framework for the licensing of persons who carry out medical gas work. The regulation has put the industry on notice that a strict and robust licensing framework with the appropriate oversight is on the way. Mr Assistant Speaker, the object of the government's bill is safety first. The government's bill will extend the strong compliance and enforcement powers of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act to medical gases, while amending the Home Building Act 1989 to establish a new category of medical gas licences. This enables the government to put in place specific obligations that apply to the medical gases that are in scope of the new regime and deal with installation, commissioning and testing, as well as requiring compliance with the Australian standards on medical gas installation. We need all these elements in place and working end to end. The bill will also operate concurrently with the existing requirements for persons who undertake medical gas work to comply with the Australian standard for medical gases under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011. The government's bill will include strict requirements for the observation of Australian standards to ensure the testing of non-flammable medical gas pipeline systems ensuring that medical gas systems once installed are regularly tested to ensure all components are continuing to operate safely, reliably and consistently. Mr Speaker, the government recognises that responding in a timely manner is critical, but it is also critical to ensure that the system we establish is robust, effective and comprehensive. To this end, the government is committing to establishing a licensing framework by November 1, 2020, which is in fact earlier than the commencement of the private member's bill, if it were to be passed. Mr Assistant Speaker, again, the government thanks the Honourable Mark Buddegie for bringing this important issue to the House and looks forward to delivering on its promise to strengthen the regulation of medical gas work.
Speaker.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Port Stephens.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. I rise to make a brief contribution on this simple and yet critically important bill, the Building Amendment Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. Now, I'm not shocked by what we have just heard from the Minister today. I am saddened by his response, and I'm sure that the families involved will also be saddened by his response. But I'll get to more. I'll address more of what he has just said a little bit later. First, I want to acknowledge the efforts of my colleague, the Honourable Mark Buddegie, who, like a dog with a bone, has brought this bill to Parliament and saw it pass the Upper House yesterday. The Honourable Mark Buddegie's bill was introduced in the absence of any action from this government. And the genesis of the bill stems from the most awful circumstances. It's a story that's been told here today, it's been told yesterday, and it's a story that's shocked families across the country. And it's a story that's changed lives forever. And today I'm reluctant to revisit the pain of the families involved by retelling their stories. But I do want to place on the record my deep admiration, and I'm sure the admiration of every single parliamentarian here in this place, for the courage and strength of Benish and Daniel Khan. And Daniel's here in the chamber today. Their nightmarish experience, many of us cannot unsee, we cannot unhear. For those of us that watched the 60 Minutes story recently, we cannot imagine, based on what we learnt years ago, 4 years ago when this actually occurred, we cannot imagine that experience in any of our lives. Having a healthy baby delivered, only to have her suffocated, poisoned by nitrous oxide instead of life-saving oxygen is unimaginable. And for two families to have experienced this nightmare is unthinkable. For the government to have not acted to prevent it occurring again 4 years on is quite frankly unforgivable. As a result of these terrible tragedies, baby Amelia's been left with lifelong quadriplegic cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities and vision impairment. Baby John lost his life. And I extend my deepest condolences of everyone here to the Ghanem family who lost baby John. In my former career as a medical negligence lawyer, I acted on behalf of too many parents whose babies lost their lives during or immediately after childbirth or were permanently injured. I remember each and every one of those families, the burden they carry for a lifetime, and it's incredibly heavy. Alongside their pain, they carry with them awfully an inexplicable and quite unfair sense of guilt as well. It's about all the what-ifs in their life. Everyone here today owes it to the Khan family, the Ghanem family, baby Amelia, baby John, and every single family in Australia to prevent anyone else experiencing this horror, grief and heartbreak that these families have gone through and will hold with them for their entire lives. quite frankly, I was shocked to realise that currently there is no requirement for someone who installs or maintains medical gas in New South Wales to have any special qualification. Legally, anyone can do it. And whilst you have to have a licence to plumb water in New South Wales, there's no licence required to undertake the high-risk, complex medical gas and mechanical services work. It requires extensive training to do it safely and to do it well. And that's something that's been missing in New South Wales. It's been something that was identified 4 years ago, and it's something that hasn't been addressed since. And the consequences of not doing it properly, we already know. The risks of incorrectly undertaking mechanical services work also has deadly consequences, risking Legionella outbreaks in air conditioning systems of hospitals and shopping centres, as we've seen in the past as well, and we'll no doubt see again if we do not act on this, if we don't pass this bill today, which will require that people undertaking this complex work have the necessary experience and have the necessary skills. It's pretty fundamental. So at the Bankstown Hospital, the tragedies were caused by the incorrect connection of gas delivery outlets. So when the doctors and nurses thought they were delivering life-saving oxygen, they were delivering nitrous oxide and poisoning these babies instead, alongside the horrific heartache to the families involved. I simply cannot imagine the devastating impact that this has had on the nurses and the doctors and the hospital workers involved. They should never have been placed in that situation, and they had every right to expect that their tools of trade would be safe to use. Like all tragedies, the effects have been felt by many. And today, we have an opportunity, everyone in this place has an opportunity to put politics aside and make sure that tragedies like this do not happen again. And it's incumbent on all of us to do that. I do not understand how this government could be so careless to have not acted on this yet. And thank goodness the Honourable Mark Buttigieg heard the pleas of families, heard the pleas of the Plumbers Union, and brought to this House today a bill which, if passed today, could save lives. You've had 4 years to move on it, to close a loophole, but you haven't. And at the 11th hour, you've decided to regulate. That was the first move, as I understand. And then now it's turned into legislation because you realise perhaps that doesn't look good enough. But in response to the tragedies in New South Wales, the Queensland government acted, the Victorian government acted, in response to tragedies that happened here in this state where you are the government. And today's bill before the House reflects the mechanisms and reflects the protections in place in Queensland and Victoria. For the Minister today to suggest that it is unpractical, I'll say impractical and unworkable, is an attempt to contrive a position which makes them feel okay about not supporting this bill today. Let's be frank, that's the convoluted contortions that the Minister just put himself through here in this chamber today was nothing but a poor excuse to avoid the embarrassment that you think you'll feel by supporting a Labor bill today. That is what we have just seen, and when we all go to vote on this bill, which we will today, for the government members to be prepared to back in a minister who has provided no justification for not supporting the bill today, that is realistic and actually practical, when he suggests that the government is putting safety first, which is what is not suggested. You have said, the Minister has said today that he's putting safety first. It could not be further from the truth if you do not support the bill today. You are putting safety second, behind politics. And that is exactly what we are pleading for you not to do today. It's exactly what the families are pleading with you not to do today. We are pleading with you today to put safety first, to put baby Amelia, to put baby John and their families first in your mind when you are deciding whether or not to support this bill today, which could prevent tragedies like this in the future. It is on your conscience how you vote today, and I urge you to look inside, think of the heartache that you might avoid for other families, and support the Honourable Mark Buttigieg's honourable and safe bill that will see a real difference made to people's lives.
I thank the member for Port Stephens. The question is the bill be read a second time. I call the member for Manly.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the government in response to the Home Building Amendment Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. I'd like to join with the Minister in acknowledging the presence of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg in the chamber this morning. Mr Buttigieg, I've taken time to read your second reading speech and acknowledge and join with the Minister in acknowledging your passion and commitment to this issue and to this cause. As honourable members have heard, the bill seeks to amend the Home Building Act 1989 to establish a new licence for mechanical services plumbing work, which includes medical gas work. The bill, if passed, would require persons who engage in the construction, installation, replacement, repair, alteration, maintenance, testing or commissioning of medical gas ventilation systems in a building to be licensed. Mr Speaker, or Madam Speaker I should say, make no mistake, the government supports the intention of the bill. These are necessary reforms, but it is equally necessary to get this right. This important issue means that the government believes changes need to be made to ensure the tragic incidents that occurred at the Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital in 2016 are not repeated. And I'd like to acknowledge the courage and the loss of both families. The government is opposing the bill but has committed to developing its own bill that will be drafted with close consultation with industry, New South Wales Health, potential licensees, registered training organisations and with the expertise of the regulator. Pleasingly, the government is acting on this issue and has given notice to a government bill with a shorter time frame for commencement than this private member's bill if it were to be passed. This week, the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Amendment Medical Gas Work Regulation 2020 was approved by the Governor. The regulation brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. This is only the first step in the government's process for establishing a strong regulatory framework for the licensing of persons who carry out medical gas work. The making of this regulation has put the entire industry on notice that a strict and robust licensing framework with appropriate oversight is on the way. Madam Acting Speaker, this is not about taking the credit, this is about getting it right. The government acknowledges the work of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg. There is no doubt of his passion and his commitment to seeing these important regulatory changes being introduced. As honourable members have heard, the bill has been brought in response to two tragic incidents at Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital in 2016, in which two newborn babies were mistakenly administered nitric oxide instead of oxygen. Tragically, one of the newborn babies, John Ganem, died, and the other, Amelia Khan, suffered brain damage as a result of the wrong gas being administered. I too would like to extend my deepest condolences and sympathies to both families. I cannot begin to imagine what those families have been through, but I can promise that the government will be bringing forward new legislation to strengthen the regulation of medical gas workers in this state. Madam Acting Speaker, the bill before the House inserts a provision into the Home Building Act that duplicates the regulation of air conditioning work. I note the Home Building Act already provides for the regulation of mechanical cooling services. If the bill is passed, the new provision in the opposition's bill and the provision that currently exists in the Home Building Act will sit side by side and result in duplication. Madam Acting Speaker, this is one of the main reasons the government is opposing the opposition's bill, in addition to the fact that the government has given notice to a government bill with a shorter time frame for commencement than this private member's bill. I repeat again that the bill put forward by the government will be thoroughly researched, developed and consulted with industry to ensure it has no unintended consequences or inconsistencies with existing laws. As the Honourable Mark Buttigieg said in the other place, mechanical services work has a great deal of complexity and requires extensive technical training to be performed safely. Madam Acting Speaker, as the Minister has outlined, the private member's bill has a number of significant issues that need to be resolved. I have taken the time to read the Honourable Member's second reading speech in the other place, and I wish to echo his words. And I quote, "I believe it is our obligation to examine issues that are affecting the health and safety of our communities and to do everything possible to protect the people across the state. To that end, I look forward to seeing the government's bill introduced to this place and delivering on its promise of a robust, workable regulation for the medical gas industry in New South Wales as quickly as possible."
I thank the member for Manly. The question is the bill be read a second time, and I call the member for Granville.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. I rise to make a contribution on the Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill. And I thank the Honourable Mark Buttigieg for bringing this bill to the Parliament. It is long overdue. It has been 4 years since 2 newborn babies died as a result of the crossed gas lines, and they were administered nitrous oxide instead of oxygen. That is an absolute tragedy, and it is very disappointing that it has taken 4 years for this to be considered by the Parliament. And in that time, up until yesterday, the government had taken no action whatsoever. Yesterday, the government has presented a regulation, which is their first step in dealing with this. I'm very disappointed this morning to hear that despite yesterday this bill passing the other place unopposed, the government is going to oppose this bill here this morning. The Minister believes that there are a number of issues with the bill. Well, why not amend it here and now, given that your government supported it yesterday? Why not amend it so that together we can all move forward? This is really incredibly disappointing. We should never forget that baby John Gannon and baby Amelia Khan their lives were, in John's case, he lost his life. In Amelia's case, her life has been forever changed by the problems that occurred at Bankstown Hospital on that day. I want to focus a lot of my discussion on how Safe Work has dealt with this situation in the ensuing 4 years. But getting back to the families and how much they have suffered, it is an absolute tragedy, and it really should not have taken 4 years. Did not need to wait for the full inquiry to determine that what we're dealing with here today, that qualified people need to be doing this plumbing work. We did not need to wait 4 years to work that out. It was probably obvious pretty soon afterwards that this is a shortcoming in the regulation of plumbing work. This is highly specialised work. It is not work that should be undertaken by a plumber unless they've done additional specialised training. And it is very disappointing that it led to the death of baby John and to the permanent disability of Amelia. In that time, there were 36 babies delivered in that ward, and thankfully none of them needed medical gas because the lines were incorrectly installed and there was nitrous oxide in the oxygen line. We all know what happened once that occurred. There was an enforceable undertaking given to New South Wales Health, and the investigation focused on the installing company. And in the end, Christopher Turner, the installer, was fined $100,000. He didn't actually inspect the work. He signed off on the incorrectly installed gas lines, and this tragedy ensued. It is an absolute disgrace and an absolute tragedy. Yet, over that 4-year period, I note some issues that have been raised by the Plumbers Union. And while there was an enforceable undertaking by the Department of Health and a whole lot of perhaps good work was done in that regard, fixing this fundamental issue that we're addressing today wasn't one of them. The Plumbers Union has raised concerns that in the work being done at Royal North Shore Hospital in the last 4 years, in the construction work there, these medical gas lines have been installed by a baker as working on the construction site there. At Wagga Hospital, more recently, it's been done by a plumber, but that plumber does not have this specialised training. So I am very concerned that that there has not been the knowledge taken on from this failing. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that this bill is supported today. And if the government thinks that they can improve it, they should improve it by way of amendment rather than voting against it. This is, I think, in some ways quite petty. And after everything that has happened, for the government to be worried about being embarrassed is just not the way to deal with something this tragic. In a few years' time, no one will remember that today you're embarrassed because an upper house backbencher moved a private member's bill that you should have dealt with years ago. No one will care. But if you vote against this, just to be petty, people will remember that. 4 years on, and we have an opportunity to do the most essential thing in addressing this issue and making sure it will never happen again. And if we pass up on that opportunity, because it's a bit embarrassing for the government that the opposition has brought this forward, then I think that is absolutely tragic. Now, a number of times in that ensuing period, representatives of Safe Work have been questioned during budget estimates or on other occasions about how their investigation was carried out and what happened. Very disappointingly, certainly back in March, Safe Work wasn't even sure if they'd ever spoken to the families about the tragic circumstances in which one of their children died and one of their children was permanently disabled. They couldn't answer that question. That, I think, speaks volumes for a lack of care and concern. The enforceable undertaking shouldn't have been the end of the matter. Taking the installer to court shouldn't have been the end of the matter. They should have been looking to make sure this never happens again. But that wasn't done. And the only person who has really pushed to make this happen and done a lot to make it happen is my colleague and my friend, Mark Buttigieg, and who has done some really great work in putting this together today. I urge the government to change their mind about voting against this. If you think you can improve it, bring forward some amendments. But if you vote against it, it is about ego, not the content of the legislation.
I thank the member for Granville. The question is the bill will now be read a second time, and I call the member for Cootamundra.
Thank you.
Speaker, I speak on behalf of the government in response to the Home Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. I would like to start by extending my deepest condolences to the parents and family of baby John, who died as a result of being mistakenly administered nitrous oxide instead of oxygen, and baby Amelia and her family. Amelia suffered brain damage as a result of the same tragic mistake. These are tragic incidents, and I would like to reiterate that the government has committed to legislating to address the issue, to establish an appropriate and robust licensing system for medical gas for persons and entities involved in medical systems. The government supports the intent of the opposition's bill, but cannot support this particular bill. Speaker, as we have heard, the object of the opposition's bill is to provide for the licensing of contractors and the certifying of supervisors and tradespersons who carry out mechanical services work and medical gas systems work. The bill attempts to license persons to undertake mechanical services and medical gas works in New South Wales. I would also like to echo the comments from the Minister, who's here today, and note the keen interest of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg has shown in this matter and for his advocacy. Unfortunately, Speaker, the bill falls short of its objectives. The bill fails to bring the regulation of medical gas work under the overall regulatory regime that already exists under the Gas and Electrical Consumer Safety Act of 2017. The bill, as currently drafted, does not achieve what it sets out to achieve. It simply creates a shell for a licensing framework under the Home Building Act 1989 without the detail to ensure an effective and comprehensive regulatory framework. The Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act of 2017 provides the regulatory framework for licensing gas workers and already includes wide-ranging and extensive compliance requirements and enforcement powers. The effective regulation of medical gas workers in New South Wales needs to begin by ensuring there is a good regulatory base. The Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act already provides the heads of power for the regulator to put in place specific conditions and obligations for workers, like prescribing medical gases that are within the scope of the new regime, dealing with installation, commissioning and testing, as well as requiring compliance with Australian medical gas standards. Unfortunately, solving this problem is not as simple as copying part of the Victorian Plumbing Regulation 2018 into the New South Wales Home Building Act, which is what appears to have been attempted in this bill. I'd like to turn now to the substance of the bill. The bill appears to have been copied from the Victorian Plumbing Regulation 2018 without any consideration of how the provisions of the Victorian regulation would interact with existing New South Wales laws. The bill's definition of medical gases extends to those used in work relating to mechanical, heating and cooling systems used in buildings and cooling towers. The definition also extends to those used where medical procedures are carried out. This could be problematic and may be interpreted to include veterinary surgeries. The bill also duplicates existing provisions in the Home Building Act related to air conditioning. Speaker, this is wholly unnecessary, as the Home Building Act already regulates persons who carry out air conditioning work. The legal foundations of the licensing framework in this bill is also flawed. The bill combines work requirements and licensing procedures within the one instrument, and this is inconsistent with building standards and licensing frameworks in New South Wales. The bill also contains the education and experience requirements for licence holders. This detail is better placed in orders and published in the Gazette to allow the government to update requirements expeditiously as they change from time to time. As the bill is drafted, if the regulator determined it was appropriate to urgently require updated qualifications for licence holders, they would be unable to do this without returning to the Parliament and amending the Act. This is an unnecessarily complex and cumbersome process. It is also out of step with the process used for mandating qualifications for other licensing frameworks used in New South Wales. This issue is also replicated in Schedule 1 of the bill, which lists the classes of medical gas which will be subject to the new licensing obligations. As drafted, these gases reflect those listed in the relevant Australian standard. The problem with this approach is that if and when the Australian standards change and new gases need to be added or removed over time, we will need to return to Parliament. As with the issue of mandating qualifications, these are requirements that should be required by regulation so that the changes can be made quickly and without needing to return to Parliament. This is precisely why the government on Wednesday moved to gazette the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Amendment Medical Gas Work Regulation 2020, which brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. On this point, the bill fails to consider the availability of training that licensed gas fitters in New South Wales will be required to undertake to meet the education and experience requirements. Again, any experience component for occupational licensing is best left to be determined by the regulator. It should not be arbitrarily determined by one person and placed in the Act. As members have heard, the government is developing its own bill to establish a more coherent and workable regulatory and licensing scheme for persons and entities involved in medical gas systems in health and medical facilities in New South Wales. The government recognises that responding in a timely manner is critical, but it is also critical to ensure that the system we establish is robust, effective and comprehensive. The government is committing to this process and will be introducing its own bill to this place in the next sitting period. The government's bill will amend the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act to extend its ambit to medical gases, amend the Home Building Act 1989 to create a new class of specialised licence for medical gas work. Conditions will also be placed on licences to require the strictest compliance with the Australian Standard for Medical Gas Systems, which sets out specifications and procedures to ensure medical gas systems are installed and tested safely, reliably and consistently. Mr Speaker, for these reasons, while supporting the intent of the bill will be opposed by the government. I look forward to seeing the government's bill in this House later this year to introduce a licensing system for medical gas work in this state.
Madam Acting Speaker.
I thank the member for Cootamundra and I call the member for Fairfield.
Thank you. Madam Acting Speaker, I move that the question now be put.
The motion is that the question be now put. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question will now be put. The mover will be exercising their right of reply. The mover will not be exercising their right of reply. The question is that, so I call the member to, you're not exercising your right of reply at all? No? Okay, no, I'm just checking. So the question is that the bill now be read a second time. Thank you, Clerk. The bill now be read a second time. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Would you like to call a division? You need to call a division if you'd like to.
The bill's just passed. Thank you very much.
A division is called. Ring the bells. Members. A division has been called.
Come on.
Ring the bells.
Come on.
Don't debate this
is not the North Sydney branch. This is the New South Wales Parliament. This is not the North Sydney branch.
Resume your seat, Member for Kira. A division has been called.
No, it has not been.
Ring the bells. Ring the bells.
And we all
Members,
saw it.
sit down or you'll be removed from the chamber.
This bill
You'll be
has just-
removed from the chamber. A division was called and you all heard the members say it. If you'd like to reflect yesterday, members on my left,
It was not called.
Yeah, right.
You're asleep.
No way was that called.
That was not called. I will, if members want to dispute that, they can discuss it with the Speaker at a future date, but you may also want to get the recording from the day, because the members to my right called a division. The member Kakira. I'm looking at you like that, Member Fakira, because you're being rude to me for no reason.
You're not doing your job.
Members, I will start putting those on my left on calls if they continue to be disorderly. Okay, Kate. Oh, we're not going to do the division yet? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Member Fakira, if you continue, I'll put you on a call. You can get going, my job because it's going to be... I see you, Gareth.
I don't see anything.
It's a joke. It's a rort. It passed. It passed. It did. It did. Yes. Yes. That's right. No one's coming in.
Well, this is say you might have a chat with Ryan because he's disputing his drag.
It passed, Jodie.
The
I don't know. I think Ryan's with the clerk. That's right. No, I don't think so. I mean, it's just bullshit. Absolutely. It passed. The minister sat there and he didn't know what was going on and she didn't know what was going on. Neither of them knew. And it passed. That's so useful, isn't it?
please. Listen.
The minister didn't say anything, neither did. Really, it's going to be a nightmare. No, Ryan and I both saw it.
No division.
He did not call for a division.
Listen to this.
I don't tell lies, and neither does Ryan.
Passed.
It absolutely passed the House because you're asleep and so was the minister. You both were asleep.
It's passed.
You can put the whole lot of us
Put the whole lot of us on a call.
Member
Rochelle Harbour is on a call. The opposition leader is on a call.
Put me on, throw me
You
out.
can
and
sit down if you would
what
like,
happened. That
opposition
passed
leader.
the
We are in the
House.
middle of a division.
It passed the House. Because the minister and the speaker have no idea what they're doing.
Ryan and I both was here and we absolutely saw it. I couldn't believe it. The minister said nothing, did not call for a division. Passed.
So Jodie, we're doing dissent before question time. I'm going to do it.
We,
I can't do it now. Yes, get them voting in, Lynn.
Okay, get everyone in to vote, and then we'll. This whole. If they don't do this, we will shut down the parliament today.
Yep, it's
like
crap.
this has never happened.
Eva, don't tell them. Sorry.
Come on, Yaz.
Wait, that's what I'm saying.
I've just said we vote.
Anna, can you count me, Anna? Anna, can you count me?
Yeah. Hang on. Thank you. Hang on. Sorry. No, not yet. Just stop there. I haven't got Dalton. You're just going a little bit too fast. Okay, keep going.
Parker. Yeah, I just couldn't believe because that group. Slow down. As we do, we raise money for charity. Camera's here. Stop saying that.
It's not the Northern Sydney branch of the Liberal Party.
Can you get the? I need the division. Who's the pairs?
No, I think you've had all your advice through.
I don't know, yeah.
That's fine, keep it, that's fine. Yep. Who have we got? No. You hold, Joe both of us. Yeah, so you've got Hazard with Lalich. That's all right. Can we come in now? Come out.
So touchy.
That's all right.
Just make sure I've got Lalich in.
Yeah.
Where's Lalich? Oh, here, so I've got to
Just
go.
hold it down. That's it.
Right, then go to
So
Hazard.
Lalich will be Hazard.
Does it say it's got A?
Yeah, we would be. Oh, okay. This morning. Hang on, no, what you do is, I think, go back. You don't have to hold.
Get rid of that, go back
So
to,
you've got.
go back to Lalich.
Got Lalich there. Yeah, hold it down. Should be an A pair, that's right. No, I think you just touch.
Yeah, but it's so touchy.
Don't hold it down. There you go.
There.
No, quick, that's it.
Okay, next
So
one.
the next one is Williams and Saffin.
Right.
Yep, that's it.
So, yep.
Okay, should have Honig and Stokes. Okay, now Stokes walked through, taking off the next check. Stokes. Okay, Steph, can you just take Stokes off? Because he walked through, take him off. Take Stokes off. Yep.
Done.
Cool. Okay. So Stokes and, that'll be Stokes and Honig.
No, that shouldn't be AP, it should be NP.
You need to do Honig first, right? That's it, now Stokes. That's it. There you go.
It's an AP.
Go back to Honig. Try and hold it down.
AP.
Okay, now hit Stokes. Don't hold it down for too long, though. There you go. Impact. All right. Stokes and Honig. Next one is Keenan Daly. So hold down Daly.
I'm not doing any more body pairs, no one's getting pairs.
Hold it down, remember?
Do you need me to uncheck Keen, did you say?
You're
Keen?
keen?
You need me to uncheck Keen?
Keen didn't walk through. He's paired. He's with Daly.
That's right.
Where is keen?
Why is Keen take Keen off? Because he's with paired with Daly. Yeah. Yep.
It's not, it didn't work again.
Just hang on. Yeah. Hold it down, that's it. So Keen. There you go.
Can I ask if the whips are satisfied? Shall we lock the doors?
Yes.
Lock the doors, yep. Lock the doors.
And the last one, that's it. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4, so there should be 8 in total. 8
That's
pairs.
correct.
That's
Yep.
it?
Yep.
That's it.
Oh gosh, it's a bit of a weird little stylus signature. But anyway.
Just make sure I've got Ryan. Yeah, I've got Ryan. 40, 44, yeah.
44 no's, 40 ayes, and 8 pairs. Got it?
So we're waiting for the video ref?
Yeah. She doesn't want it.
That was just unbelievable. Ryan and I were here standing right here and we saw it. I just sat there. There being 44 noes and 40 ayes, the division is lost.
The clerk will read the next item of business.
What an absolute joke. You have one job in this
Member
place.
for Kira,
One
Member
job.
for Kira, I warned you earlier. You're on a call. Member for Shell Harbour, you're on a second call, and I'll put you out if you continue. The clerk. Notices of